Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Our guest today is Ronny Avendano. He left Canada for El Salvador, where he's now the owner of the, how do you call it, the Bitcoin hardware store?
Yep.
Bitcoin hardware store. And I think you're getting some new projects going as well, right?
Yeah.
So we'll get into that in the episode. But Ronny, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Vance. Really appreciate it. Been following your stuff for quite a while. Love what you're doing and love what you're putting out there for people.
Thank you. And I saw you just recently spoke, right, at the was it the Plan B conference in El Salvador?
Yeah, I spoke at the very first ever Plan B forum down here in El Salvador, which was based around Bitcoin. Down here in El Salvador, as we know, Bitcoin still right now is legal tender.
Mm-hmm.
And so people come down here to check it out. And I shared my experience of what it's like opening up a business in a brand new country. I've been in El Salvador for 4 years, so I shared my experience to anybody who was interested into what it's like to opening up a business down here in El Salvador.
Cool. And you're, I think, recording. We're recording audio only, but I can see you, and you're in the Bitcoin hardware store right now.
Yeah, that's right. I got in for the shift today. And I'm here right now. I spend most of my time in El Zonte, in El Salvador, meeting people who are leaving their situation, meeting people who are coming down to El Salvador to see if it's a good fit for them. And I love it down here. I love that experience of being able to have these conversations with these people who are, looking for a way out. And yeah, so I try to be down here in El Zonte as much as possible, which is a expat community. There's lots of people who are coming from outside of El Salvador that live here in El Zonte.
And do you live in El Zonte, or you live somewhere else?
Yeah, I spend a majority of my time in El Zonte. I do, one of the other things that I do is I help people with relocation down here in El Salvador. So when I'm helping them out with their relocation, sometimes I have to move out while I give them a hand because I got multiple places. Being Salvadoran, I can always go back to my family's house, which is about an hour away from here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty mobile. That's one of the things that I actually enjoy about El Salvador is how small the country is and how mobile I can be. And that's just kind of my personality. I've always been able to just grab my stuff and go, which again, it goes along with the Bitcoin thing where I don't really own much physical things. So I don't need to worry about, what do I need to take with me and stuff like that.
Cool. And I guess what are some of the most popular things that you sell at the Bitcoin hardware store? I guess it's like mining rigs and stuff.
No, no, mining rigs, not really, even though they would be a great seller in terms of revenue. But it actually, Bitcoin, when you think of Bitcoin, and this is how I like to educate people and talk to them about it, there's three important things when it comes to Bitcoin, and it's your self-custody of the Bitcoin in and of itself, so your hardware wallet, your node, which verifies everything in the system, and your miner. Now, the mining aspect is typically what gets people excited because they think they can make a lot of money, they think they can get rich off of mining. But mining with Bitcoin, how it is today at its all-time hash, is actually quite expensive. It's quite costly to mine. But there
Mm.
are opportunities when it comes to mining because mining works if you can keep your electricity costs down. So if you can find a way to recycle electricity, if you can find a way to use wasted electricity to mine, then it becomes, and you can scale that, then it becomes absolutely lucrative to run Bitcoin mining. Now, the Bitcoin hardware store, what we focus on really is helping people self custody their Bitcoin and to secure their Bitcoin. Because as we know, Bitcoin right now is at 100K. We've seen it go from in 2 years from 16K to 100K. That's my experience because I'm still relatively new in the Bitcoin space. But think of
Mm-hmm.
the people who've been in it since 2013, since 2010, when it went from a dollar to $100. That's a 100x movement in a matter of like 6 months or less. So Bitcoin can skyrocket before you know it. And sometimes people are not prepared for that, and they're not safeguarding their Bitcoin in the way that they should be, considering the fact that you have these large exchanges holding a lot of people's Bitcoin. And that's
Hmm.
kind of what we want to educate people on are the dangers of holding your Bitcoin on an exchange. You
Hmm.
shouldn't have your Bitcoin on an exchange because then it's not really your Bitcoin. So take control of it. If this is a tool, if this is an asset that you really believe in, one of the main properties of Bitcoin is that you can actually own it. There does not need to be an intermediary. And so that's what we focus on really. That's the goal is to get people to actually really use Bitcoin for what it is. A majority of the people I'd say probably use Bitcoin as a store of value, which is fine. I have no problem with that. But if you're going to use it as a store of value, store it yourself. Don't have a
Hmm.
custodian store it for you because then you're at the hands of the custodian. And maybe some of your listeners haven't heard, but there's been so many instances. You have FTX collapse, you have Celsius collapse, you have Mt. Gox, you have Quadriga. I could go on and on with the list of exchanges that have gone and gone bankrupt and essentially taken everyone's Bitcoin. And so that's kind of what we're trying to avoid here. And that's really what we are sharing with the community here is the importance of self-custodying your Bitcoin. And when you self-custody it, then you can move on to owning a node and then going on to
Yeah.
maybe seeing if mining is profitable for you. But for
So
the
what do you
most,
sell in the store?
pardon?
What do you sell in the store? You got Bitcoin T-shirts. What else you got?
So we got hardware wallets are our main
Hardware
main
wallets,
sellers.
which is
Yep.
like a little
Yeah.
like
So cold
USB
storage.
stick or something.
Yeah, there's different brands. There's even open source projects, and an
Uh
open
huh.
source project literally means that there's no company behind it. It's a open source software that volunteers
Okay.
essentially run, and the code is
So
verifiable.
hardware
Everyone can look
wallets,
at it.
and how much do
Yep.
those cost? Like on it, like what do they
So
range
the
from?
lowest on the lowest end, we have $35 for
Uh
a
huh.
one-time single-use hardware wallet.
Uh
And
huh.
on the high end, we have $329 for like a serious security model offline computer that you can store your Bitcoin keys on. So it
Okay.
ranges.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
And
Yeah, I feel
and
like
the
I'd be
the
tripping
option
out
will
about having like $1 million in Bitcoin on like a little $25 one.
you should trip out more for having your $1 million of Bitcoin on an exchange, right?
This is
And so
true.
that's what we're trying to get people off of. But it
Okay.
just takes some practice, like anything else.
Okay.
They
So we got
ultimately all work the
T-shirts, we
same.
got hardware wallets. What else are people buying
We
in the
got
store?
nodes, we got Bitcoin nodes, Bitcoin miners, we got books. So we have a nice little library
Books.
section. We
Yeah.
got board games, which are Bitcoin specific board games.
Uh-huh.
And then we have all the accessories that you would need. So like steel plates to write down your seed phrase on, metal plates in case like your house ever burns on fire or flood,
That's
because
fun.
you need to protect yourself from these things. Ultimately, the hardware wallet in and of itself is not important, Vance. What's important is the seed phrase.
Uh-huh.
And so you want to generate a seed phrase, you want to generate it on a device that is not connected to the internet, but your seed phrase is ultimately what gives you access to moving Bitcoin. And you can use any device to do that. As long as you have your seed phrase, you will always have access to your Bitcoin. So it's actually extremely important that you stamp your seed into metal. So we sell metal, yeah. Then we sell T-shirts.
But
We
then
got
wouldn't
I said
but you don't do the actual engraving of the metal for them, right? Because
no,
then you would know
no,
their
no.
seed phrase.
Correct, correct. No, we don't do that. What we do is I came up with this business model. I mean, I didn't come up with the business model, but the technique that we do is we have a set of letters and numbers.
Hmm.
So all the letters, all the numbers, and we rent them out to people for 3 days. So you can
Like
come into
a
the
little
store.
engraver machine, basically.
Yeah, and so like there are these little stamps, and you just take a hammer and you just hammer the letter
Ah,
into the metal. And
ah,
so you take it home with you, you do it in private, you do it in your bathroom, you put up a tent, you pitch a tent and you do it in the tent. But you essentially stamp your seed phrase into metal with these letters, these punch
that's cool. I
sets.
didn't know they had that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. There's other methods too. You can have like an actual engraver, like a laser engraver,
Hmm.
and then you can just write it out yourself. So there are other methods. We find this to be a little kind of fun to stamp into metal, uh, effective and cheap. Right. Ultimately, we want the mission of the hardware store is to make Bitcoin accessible for everyone, and so not
Hmm.
everyone can afford a metal engraver, but you can come into the store, you can rent it out for $10, and you're good to go. You can store millions of dollars in Bitcoin for $10.
Not bad.
Yeah. Um,
Cool. Where in Canada are you from?
I was born in Toronto.
Okay.
Yeah. The big, great city of Toronto, actually, right in the heart of the city. And my family moved there from El Salvador in the 80s during the Civil War, back then. And I was born in Toronto, spent my entire life out there, went to school in Toronto, graduated from Ryerson University. I don't even think it's called that anymore.
Nice.
I
Right.
graduated from there.
Yep.
Yeah, I took business school. So I was always in finance. I was always in business and I honestly never thought I'd leave Canada. I never thought I'd leave Toronto. I love the place, love the people. Was a big fan of the city, a big fan of having access. And I think that was before I started traveling. Once I started traveling, I actually started to, the biggest thing that opened my eyes was that Toronto is, it's special because it's extremely privileged. Majority of the world does not live and does not understand what Toronto is. And a majority of
Hmm.
the world will never have an experience of living in a big city like that. Big buildings, infrastructure, food whenever you want, access to anything really whenever you want. Completely commercialized, consumerism at its finest. It's a special place, but it just started becoming something to me that this didn't mean anything anymore. It really was, all the stuff that I was seeing in Toronto was meaningless. Because when you travel, you start to realize that most people don't live like that. Most people, when I moved down to El Salvador, I said this on a podcast recently that some of my biggest goals when I first moved out of Toronto and moved down to El Salvador, some of my biggest accomplishments were just going to the grocery store, grabbing everything I needed, and coming home. Like that made me feel great. Whereas you go to a place like Toronto or any big city where you have Uber Eats, you have Uber, you have these services, and food no longer, you don't just eat food for a necessity. You have access to food just because you're bored. You have access to food because you have nothing else to do and you're alone, and maybe you just like food's going to make you feel better. And so going to these countries where traveling and experiencing these things made me realize, like, man, there's more to the world than just living in a big city, working 9 to 5, being stuck in traffic, dealing with, big city problems. So I didn't want to deal with that anymore. I didn't think it was worth my time. And so thankfully I had a Salvadoran passport. So, I left. I still think about Toronto, not as often as I used to. I still
Yeah.
follow what's happening out there. I
The
still
plane.
uh, I still
You
got
see the
friends
plane
that I
though? You
reach
see the
out to.
plane that went upside down?
Yeah, I did. That was crazy. That was crazy. First thing I noticed was the snow, how much snow there was. I haven't seen snow in 4 years.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing for me. I don't know when the last time you were in Toronto or in Canada was, but I haven't seen snow in 4 years, so I don't even know what that.
I usually
I'm
go
glad
back
that
at
that happened.
Christmas, so I do.
Okay,
I still see the snow.
that was one of the reasons I left. I knew I didn't want to be in a place that was
Same.
cold like that. So I saw that Toronto crash. I still follow Six Buzz TV on Instagram, just to kind of see if I see any friends on the news or anything. I used to follow Toronto sports quite a lot. I think one of the coolest things that I ever saw was when the Toronto Raptors won the NBA championship.
But you were already
I
in
would
El
say
Salvador
that's
when they won.
no, I left the year after,
When did
but
they
I
win?
was
What year? I
already.
thought they won in like after the
They won
pandemic started. They won
2019. They were
2019.
the last. They were the last team to win before the pandemic. Yeah.
Ah,
The
okay.
next year was the bubble year.
Yeah, I guess you're right. True.
Yeah. So
Shit.
Toronto was the last team to win a championship before the pandemic. So I got to see that. And for me, that was peak Toronto. Like the Raptors winning the championship to me was peak Canada, even I'd say. Got to see a million people
Hmm.
on the road. Everybody was happy. Nothing was going on. There was no
Hmm.
danger. Everybody felt great. And then from there, to me, like Toronto and Canada just went downhill. And I decided to leave. I didn't look back. I'm kind of glad, but what worries me is that my family's still out there because I see a lot of the things that are happening, and people are just angry out there. People are frustrated. And when you're frustrated and you're angry and your community's angry, like negative, bad things can happen. And when people feel desperate with the cost of living,
Hmm.
bad things can happen. So I still keep up to date with what's happening out there, and maybe I'll come visit sometime soon. But I'm really just trying to build out something down here in an area that I really truly enjoy. You know, whether it's El Salvador, I just recently traveled to Guatemala. I fell in love with Guatemala, man. It is absolutely stunning. It is
You liked
beautiful
it?
down there. Yeah, a lot, a lot. The culture, you know, seeing the indigenous people down there, a
Hmm.
lot more culture from from the indigenous tribes. They still speak their language, like they still speak their dialects, which I thought was really cool. Um, and then I was in Honduras as well. Like earlier last year, I went to Roatan. I was in Coban. I was in one of these other islands. Can't remember the name off the top of my head, but like Honduras was also beautiful. So I've really fallen in love with like Central America. It's just a great place. Friendly people, interesting culture, great food. The food is top notch, I gotta say. Every time I travel somewhere, I'm trying something different. If you're ever in Honduras, I would suggest the pollo chuco, which is absolutely amazing. If you're in Guatemala, everything there was really, really good. If you're in El Salvador, you know, come try some pupusas. But the quality of the food down here is really, really good. You know, our beef comes from Nicaragua, and so the beef here is really, really good. Those are some of the things that I thought I missed about Toronto was the food. And what I really missed were the flavors of the different cultures. Like, you know, Toronto, you got access to Indian food, you know, Guyanese food, Chinese food, Thai food. You have all these different options for food. And El Salvador doesn't have that. Not to that large extent. Where like I'm originally from Scarborough. I don't know if you're familiar with the Toronto area, but
Yeah, yeah, I'm
Scarborough
familiar.
as a whole has so many immigrants that the food is absolutely phenomenal. But the last time I was in Toronto, when I compared to the food down in El Salvador, the quality of food is so much better down here. Like the fruits, the veggies, the animal product, it's all fresh and it's not factory food. And you can tell, like, there's a big difference between the quality of the food. The flavors might not be the same, but the quality is just so much better. And so that was one of the things that I originally thought I'd really miss about Toronto, but not so much anymore. I just try to source whatever flavors I'm trying to get. If I'm trying to source Indian food, I'll go get some curry somewhere. I'll make my own curry. You know, if I'm sourcing Thai food, I'll go find some chili somewhere. There's really only one store down in El Salvador where you can get like Asian gourmet food, but I'll go down there and I'll do the best that I can to get what I need because the quality of the food is way better. But yeah, Toronto is it's been 4 years since I've been back, and I can't say I really miss it that much.
I think this thing about the quality of the food is an interesting one because no one really leaves their home country because the quality of the food sucks because they don't really know anything else. But it's something that it's very like, and it's probably not enough of an impetuous to want to leave. I can't convince someone to come to Latin America just because the food is better. But guys, it's way better. It's so much more fresh. Everything tastes like very different. Um, the egg tastes like it looks healthier. Like it has like a bright orange yolk instead of like some sickly pale yolk. The fruit, I mean, when my family or friends come down, they're like, this is the best watermelon I've ever had in my life. This is the best mango I've ever had in my life. This is the best banana I've ever had in my life. It's very noticeable when something hasn't spent 35 days on a shipping container and then it has to get trucked from the port in Montreal to Toronto, and then it's like sitting on the Loblaw shelf, and by the time you eat it, it's been like basically 2 months, and it was like flash frozen or whatever they do. So it makes a big difference. This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Job Stacking. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then Rolf Haltza, author of Job Stacking, guarantees you'll be able to double your income by implementing his paycheck multiplication layering method. This is the exact system Rolf has used to take his own income and those of many others beyond $20K a month. With this method, Rolf contractually guarantees that you'll be able to double your income in 45 days. So, if you're interested in unleashing your earning potential and doubling your income, then click the link in the description and book a call with Rolf right now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I don't think people talk about that enough, but that's one of the biggest things that I noticed in terms of differences between Canada and Latin America was just like the food quality was way better. So it doesn't even matter who you buy your food from, where you get lunch, where you get breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
The food's just gonna taste way better. It's night and day. You can't really describe it unless you come down and visit for yourself. And then, obviously your purchasing power is a lot better down here. So
Mm-hmm.
for
How do you
25
how do you
bucks,
find that? Can I ask you, because you came from Canada, right? And then the U.S. dollar feels expensive because the Canadian dollar is like worthless compared to the U.S. dollar. And then
yeah,
does El Salvador feel expensive as a Canadian, or what's your experience there?
I think I think it depends. When I first got down here, going from Canadian to US dollars was definitely I was always doing the math in my head. Like what am I really spending here? And I'm a special case because Toronto is one of the most expensive cities in the world. So, Toronto, Vancouver, and then the rest of Canada is actually not as expensive as those places. So if you're from Toronto or Vancouver, I feel like no matter where you go, everything is going to seem affordable to you and seem cheap to you. So my perspective is kind of unique in that way that I came down here and I was like, okay, things are pretty affordable down here. But if you're from anywhere else, you're from Europe, you're from some midwestern town in the U.S. El Salvador is not the cheapest place in Central America. It's actually quite expensive. And so, how do I see it? I see it as affordable to me because I've lived in one of the most expensive cities in the world. But for the regular person, anyone coming down here, I would actually say El Salvador is not that affordable. Now,
Hmm.
how do I make myself feel better about that? El Salvador right now currently is the safest country in the world. So I would put that as a cost of business.
Worth it.
It's yeah, exactly. It's worth it. I could go to Mexico for sure, but then it's cheaper. But do I really want to deal with, the cartels or anything that you hear on the news in Mexico? Not really. Do I want to go to like Nicaragua and these other places where it's cheaper, Brazil, where it's cheaper and deal with, petty theft and things like that? No, not necessarily. And especially as a business, right? I don't want to have to deal with any of that stuff. Here in El Salvador, I feel completely safe. I go out whenever I want. I walk down the street in the middle of the night. I see females coming down here, and they say how safe they feel, and it's important for them to feel safe. And so El Salvador is not the cheapest, but when I was living in Toronto, going out to eat by myself would cost me, a couple $100. Here, I can have a nice dinner with somebody, 50 US dollars, at a really nice place, in the middle of San Salvador, and have a pretty good night. And now, what I will say though is, if you want to live a local life, if you want to live like a local, you can definitely save money on that aspect. You want to eat, eat like a local, travel like a local, do the things that the locals do. So, for example, if you're in El Zonte and you want to live like a local, that means you're eating pupusas for dinner every night. You're having eggs and beans for breakfast with some fruit. And then you're like surfing all day, and surfing is essentially free. So you're not spending a lot of money. But if you want to live a lavish lifestyle, there's a tax, like there's a high tax to goods here in El Salvador. I think it's about 30%. So when you try to buy a phone or you try to buy anything that is considered luxurious, that isn't your basic needs, if you've been here long enough or if you've traveled anywhere else across the world, you start realizing El Salvador is not cheap. And so it sits in this like very unique place of it's cheap if you're from a major city. You can notice the difference. If you're here on vacation, like You think it's paradise, but when you actually live down here, you start to realize it's there might be cheaper places to go to. You just
Yeah,
have to weigh it out.
it's all right though.
Do I play it out in a place that maybe is a little bit more dangerous than El Salvador? For
Well,
me,
you
I
got
feel
that.
like
You got that story, right? You like have to be in El Salvador just because you got like a sick story going on, being from Salvadoran descent. And I had a couple lines of questioning about that, but I guess while we're talking about cost of living, just to wrap up on that topic a little bit, what do you think your buddies are paying for rent, kind of like on average, or what's some of the range that some people are paying for rent down there?
yeah. So I live in a being in El Zonte, it's if not the priciest place down
Yeah,
here,
probably. Yeah,
but
right.
yeah, definitely I'd say so. But I would say on average, you're probably looking at about $400 to $500 a month for like a bedroom somewhere in the city.
It's not bad.
So if you wanted to live somewhere in the city, you can get a bedroom for like
You
four or
mean in
five
San
hundred
Salvador?
bucks in San Salvador. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
If you're in El Zonte, it's closer to like 800, 700, $800 a month
You're saying
for
for
a
a
bedroom.
room.
Yeah, for a
Okay, what
room.
about like a two-bedroom place?
A two-bedroom house, probably around like 14, 15 in El Zonte. In San Salvador, I know three bedrooms go for about 1,400.
Uh huh.
So you get a master and two like junior suites, in a nice area in an area that's a little like suburby, closer to the beach, around 1,000, 1,100 for a three-bedroom.
Gotcha.
So yeah, so it's not too bad. Just depends on where you want to live.
Right, right. Okay, so live like a student, $500 rent. If you got a small family or whatever, and you want a two-bedroom, like 1,500 a month, maybe a bit less, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. If you have like two kids and they're like 7 and 8 and they need their own room, then you're looking at like 1,100, 1,200 bucks a month for a three-bedroom, decent bedroom and a nice apartment. Just
Yeah,
maybe not in the most convenient area.
sure. And I think it's always worth paying like a little bit extra to be, in a walkable area or to be near stuff, because otherwise you're just going to end up spending more on taxis or just like transporting yourself and wasting time and everything. And
Yeah,
by
the
the way, if
traffic
my
down here is terrible.
so I hear. And by the way, if my the reason my screen just went black is because I'm watching the sunset and I can't get up to
Okay,
like turn the balcony light on.
no
But yeah.
worries.
Um, okay, cool.
Ubers
So
are
I mean,
relatively cheap down here too, by the way. Like I could get an Uber across town for like $5, which is great.
they have Uber in El Zonte
Yeah, we got not in El Zonte, but in San Salvador.
in
Like I
San
could get an
Salvador.
Uber across town for like $5, $6 during non-rush hour. During rush hour,
Mm,
maybe closer to 10, but extremely affordable.
yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Um, and down in the beach, there's no Uber.
No, well, in El Zonte is kind of far from
Yeah.
your main areas. So there's another town called El Tunco, which is
Right.
10 kilometers, 15 kilometers east from where I'm at right now in El Zonte, and because that's closer to the city, you will be more likely to find an Uber, so you can. In El Zonte, it's extremely difficult. It's not a large enough place as of yet. El Tunco gets a lot more foreigners, a lot more movement, a lot more foot traffic. El Zonte doesn't get that yet, so you're not going to find. You could maybe find an Uber, if you're lucky. But if you're in an emergency and you need to be at the airport for like a certain time, or you need to be somewhere for a certain time, I wouldn't count on an Uber. I'd organize my
Yeah, yeah.
trip
So do you have a
beforehand.
car?
I rent a car. I don't like
You
I
rent
said,
a
I don't
car.
really own anything that's
Yeah.
not Bitcoin.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you were saying that before, I was just thinking like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't buy a car because I've been kind of like debating it recently. Maybe I shouldn't have
Yeah.
things
To
to like.
to me, it doesn't make sense. It's useful. I do own a motorcycle, which I use to rip up and down sometimes.
Nice.
It's pretty affordable. But cars are expensive down here. Talking about that tax that I mentioned to you, that
Uh-huh.
customs fee and an importing fee, cars here are extremely expensive. I just
Right.
had a friend buy a 2017 Kia Forte, which is not the car's not terrible, but like the brand's not terrible. I drove this car and it's
Yeah, it's a low
complete
end car.
garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he paid 8 grand USD for a car that like barely runs.
8 grand. Okay. I mean,
So yeah, no,
you,
I just rent a car when I need one.
Yeah, there's a phrase where it's like it costs 2 grand a month to live pretty much anywhere. So just fucking just go wherever there's the most opportunity, or wherever you feel best, right? I mean, there's no point living somewhere cheaper like Nicaragua or something just to save 500 bucks a month. It doesn't really. Okay, moving on. So um, some people might say you were kind of in a special situation, being of El Salvadoran descent, and you got the hookups, you got the abuela or something going on there, and so a bit of a network. What do you think? What's your kind of experience been seeing other people make the move and relocate with no family in El Salvador, or who can't speak Spanish? This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Crema Social. Crema Social is like TikTok for international dating. It's an app you can download right now on your phone, and 3 out of 4 people on Crema are single women. The app was founded in Colombia, so unsurprisingly, there are a lot of Latinas on the app, by the way. So, how does it work? Crema Social is a social meal experience where you invite a hot girl for a lunch date via video call and food delivery. New concept, so you'll have to try it out for yourself, but this is probably the best way to meet Latinas before you visit the country. So if you're in Latin America or planning to visit Latin America, download Crema Social now and start getting dates right away. There will be a link in the description to download, or just search Crema Social on your favorite app store. Have fun, guys.
Yeah, great question. I talk about that quite often, and I always give props to those people because, I moved down here speaking the language, like you said, having my abuela to watch my back, and a lot of people have not. But what I sense from them, and I get the same sense too, because take a couple steps back. When I moved to El Salvador, I knew the same about Bitcoin as most people would. It's a technology that is up and coming, speculative. You can make a ton of money, you could lose a ton of money, and it's extremely volatile. So that was what I knew about Bitcoin before I moved down here. When I got down here and I started meeting people, it really was the community that made my ultimate decision to stay. And it was the community that, it was because of the community that I made the ultimate decision to start a business. It
Mm-hmm.
was because of everything going around me and the people that I saw that were here. And so, when I see these people moving down here, I applaud them. It's extremely difficult, but when you find your tribe, you're I'm sure you've heard this, and you are the you are the same, or you are the five closest people to you. You are the
Yeah,
five
the
closest
average
people
of
that you
your
spend.
five closest friends. Yeah.
Correct. So I 100% agree with that. And when I'm down here, I this community here, the people, the quality of people who are here is just incredible. I would say to anyone who's thinking about it, going to a place where they don't speak the language, it's fine. You're gonna meet people who are more similar to you and have more similarities here, like thousands of kilometers away from your country, than you are even from in your own hometown, right?
Yeah.
If you feel like you don't belong in your hometown, you feel like there's just something missing in your hometown, doesn't matter where that is, I guarantee you will find people who are similar to you in the places where you decide to go. So, you move to Mexico, or you move to Jamaica, or you move to, Brazil. There are other people who are living a very similar life to you and decided to make that move. And now everybody's congregating in these places. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've seen that, people who have moved and left everything behind, and now are living in a similar place, close to you, close proximity to you. And the only thing that you guys don't have in similarity is where you were born. But everything else, your mindset, the way you live your life, the things that are important to you, your value system, you have a lot of similarities in that place. And so I'd recommend, I tell people, do what what your gut tells you to do. If you don't feel like you're in the right place, it's going to be difficult, but sometimes difficulty challenges is what creates a person, being too comfortable sometimes creates these uneasy feelings of like, am I doing the right thing? Should I be here? Can create anxiety, can create depression. But when you're challenged to do something that's out of the box, that's not comfortable, again, for me, even though I don't live anywhere near my family. I decided to live in El Zonte,
Hmm.
and going grocery shopping on the bus, not knowing anybody when El Salvador was still dangerous. This was 2022. I'm talking about, like, that was not comfortable, but I had to do it because I had to eat. And when I got home, I'd be like, man, I'm so accomplished. I feel so accomplished doing this. And you start to create your own community as well. You start to become someone within the community. You start to really figure out who you are as a person, what it is that you want to do with your time, what it is that you want to do to help out your community. You figure out a lot about who you are. And so I would just tell those people, like, if you're considering the move, if you're anywhere, again, I'm 36, right? So in my head, if you're anywhere under the age of like 40, you shouldn't even be thinking about it. You should make that move, because
Yeah.
if it's a mistake, at least you figured it out
You
earlier
can
on in
always go
life than
home.
having to like wait till you're 50 and then have regrets at your 60 that you never did this and you never figured it out. And so that's what I would recommend to people. Go out, do it, and the younger that you are, the better for you. Better to make the mistakes early on in life.
A ladder recommendation: if you're in LATAM
That's-
and you get your own groceries, you need a girlfriend.
yeah, that could help. That could definitely help.
I
I
don't
mean,
I
the
don't go
women
to the
down here are
grocery store
beautiful as
ever.
well. The women down here are beautiful. The culture, they're so friendly. The vibe is great. Go to a dance club. Go dance to some Latin music. Like, you'll meet some fantastic people. Like, if you're a single male, you got to be coming down to Latin America. You got to experience it. There's nothing else like it, to be honest.
And I don't even have to talk about this stuff. People just it should be like sort of known, or I don't know. But um how was your Spanish when you came down? Like, I imagine you probably spoke Spanish with your parents in the house, but I imagine they could tell that you were not a local, obviously. But are you like were you like 100% in Spanish, or you still had to like learn, get the last, like you
No,
know
that's a good point. That was exactly what happened when I first came down here. People automatically knew I was not from here. They're like, the first question the locals had is like, "Where are you from?"
uh-huh.
And I was like, El Salvador." They're like, "No, where are you from?" I was like, Toronto." So for the first year or so that I was here, Monday to Friday, because back in the day, before I got into Bitcoin, I'm a finance guy. So I was trading derivatives, I was trading options, and that's what I was doing Monday to Friday. And Saturdays and Sundays, because I'm talking traditional finance, they were closed. The markets were closed Saturdays and Sundays. So what did I do Saturday and Sunday? I would go to the beach and just hang out at the beach with the locals and like mess around with them, joke around, have a couple of drinks with them, and
Yeah.
start picking it up. I considered myself a mute when I first got down here because I didn't want to talk. Everybody knew the moment I said a word that I wasn't from here. So I spent, my first year, I spent kind of learning the lingo, learning the language, the jargon that they used. And then now I would say I'm extremely comfortable speaking Spanish to anybody.
Hmm.
And so I just kind of go out and speak the language. But when I got here, I spoke Spanish because my family spoke Spanish. I always spoke Spanish at home with my parents, but it was, 5% of my entire day. I would speak Spanish in Toronto.
Hmm.
And then down here, it became, the large part of my day. And so
Hmm.
for the first year, I was definitely uncomfortable. So I did go through those phases of not even wanting to like speak, sometimes not even wanting to go out, not even wanting to like have conversations with people because I didn't feel confident in my Spanish. But then towards the end, now I'll talk to anybody, and you learn it. That, and I say the same thing about Bitcoin. If you want to learn a language, you have to immerse yourself. You want to learn French, you got to go to a place where they speak French. You want to speak, Portuguese, you got to go to a place where they speak Portuguese. You want to learn about Bitcoin, you got to go to a place where they talk about Bitcoin. You want to learn Spanish, you got to hang around with all the Spanish speaking folks. Immerse yourself, and that's the only way you'll learn.
100%. Is there a term for like El Salvadorans that move abroad?
For
Do they have a word
Salvadorans
for
that
it?
move
Do they
abroad,
have a word for it? Like
uh,
in like Mexico, there's a term for Mexicans that move abroad. It's called pocho. So like a
uh,
Mexican American, if you're like a Mexican American, you're a pocho. I don't know if they have El Salvador has a similar word.
yeah, there is. There's the term is called hermano lejano, so like
Hmm.
brother from a distance.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Distant
your
brother.
hermano lejano is somebody who comes from abroad, who is Salvadoran descent, maybe lived here, or parents lived here and then they were born out in the US. So that's the word they use here for. So I was an hermano lejano, and some of my friends that I hang around with now, we sometimes still joke around about it. They're like, "Yeah, do you remember when you were just an hermano lejano? Nobody thought you'd stick around." And then it's like 4 years later, you're still here. Yeah, we still joke around about that stuff.
Are you
It's a
seeing a
cool
lot of
community.
that? Like Salvadorans that are moving back?
Yeah, quite a lot, especially being at the store. Salvadorans who are living abroad, I would say, are definitely paying attention to politics. Any Salvadoran living abroad is definitely paying attention to politics because I was. That was my experience when COVID happened. I was comparing the Canadian government, with Trudeau and everything, and Doug Ford being from Ontario, to what was happening in El Salvador.
Hmm.
And if you're Salvadoran, if you come from a Salvadoran household, your parents probably watch Salvadoran news every day, no matter where you live. You could be living in the States,
That's
Canada,
funny.
China, and your family's gonna have somehow have access to Salvadoran news all the time. So it doesn't surprise me. I'm seeing Salvadorans who have. I actually just last week I met a Canadian who lived in Scarborough, like 5 minutes away from me, who hadn't been in El Salvador for 35 years. He's retired now. And he came to my store because he was looking for a Bitcoin wallet. He didn't know me, I didn't know him, and we grew up like 5 minutes away from each other. He'd
Hmm.
never been to El Salvador. And now he's retired and he's here and he's starting up his business, brought his family, brought his wife, brought his kids. Well, brought one of his children. The other ones are still in Toronto, and I'm seeing it more and more. And I'm not surprised, Vance. I'm really not surprised at all because when I did my like evaluation, when I did my pros and cons, just the lifestyle, the weather, the people, the food, like everything. It was pretty lopsided on one end as
Yeah,
to where was the best place for me at the time. And so, and Salvadorans are proud people. If you've ever been here, Salvadorans are extremely proud, humble but proud people. Love their place, love their music, love their food. You could go anywhere in the world, and a Salvadoran's going to be wearing his jersey. Talking to you about pupusas, telling you how beautiful El Salvador is. And now that it's a safe country, I think people are even more proud and even and want to show the world and be
totally,
like, yo, you need to go to El Salvador. Like I'm on that team. I tell everybody they should come. You know,
totally.
I'm extremely proud of the place, of the country, of the people. It's a special place.
Have you convinced any Toronto buddies to come down? Hey guys, quick break from the episode to tell you about BitRefill. BitRefill allows you to shop online and in person without banks, converting your crypto directly into merchant balance. We're talking gift cards to Nike, Amazon, Apple, Airbnb, Hotels.com, and many more, all paid for with crypto. BitRefill offers more than 10,000 gift card options in 180 countries all across Latin America, including Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, El Salvador, and many more. You can also apply the code MyLatinLife at checkout to get 10% back on your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information.
I've convinced a few to come visit, for sure. A couple that are Salvadoran. One of my really good friends who's not from El Salvador, okay, he was one of the first people to come down. Not as much as I thought. You know, it's been 4 years, so I definitely thought I'd see more people around. A lot of people tell me they're coming, and then when push comes to shove, I'm like, so when are you coming? They haven't made it down yet. But yeah, some of my close friends have come, checked it out. They've really enjoyed it actually. I had one of my friends telling me that he was going to move down here after he found himself a Salvadoran girl a chica that he really liked.
Mhm.
He was impressed, and now he's traveling through like Asia and whatnot. But people enjoy it. I think it's because the idea of what El Salvador used to be and what you used to hear about El Salvador is completely different from when you actually land.
Mm.
So if you expect El Salvador to be like dangerous and grungy and poor, when you get here, you're extremely surprised with what it actually is, and I think that shocks people in a good way, and it kind of keeps them wanting to come back for more.
Totally. Yeah, it's one of the sort of sad realities of this thing where, your best friends just are not going to come to Latin America with you. Maybe they'll visit once or twice and they're going to have a sick time, but they just can't get the remote work thing together or whatever it is, or they can't get rid of those golden handcuffs from the bank job or whatever it is, and they're just not going to make it happen. So you kind of have to go this route alone, but it's still ultimately worth it and rewarding. And you're going to make new friends that are actually more aligned with you, the type of people who value location independence, who value Bitcoin, who value things that you value as well.
Yeah, 100%, man. That's what attracted me to El Zonte was the people who valued independence. Like when I first got here, everyone that I met, this was 2014, 2015, everybody was a surfer. And they were all like digital nomads. They all ran their own businesses.
Mm-hmm.
They all did whatever they wanted. And at the time, they all wanted to be in El Salvador. So I met a lot of those people, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what attracted me down here was those people, was the people who were more aligned to the values and to the goals that I wanted to accomplish. I did not want to be locked down, tied down to a job and being in a place that, I felt forced to be. I wanted to be free. And so when I moved back to El Salvador, so the first time I came back as an adult, because I spent 15 years without visiting in El Salvador.
Mm-hmm.
I first came back as an adult in 2014 because my grandmother passed away. So I came, I checked it out. It had been 15 years since I was here. Last time I think I was 14 years old. And so I went around with my cousins. They showed me to a couple beaches. I really like this one. Again, I met these people, and I was like, "What are you guys doing here? Why are you in El Salvador? Like, who comes here?" And they were all entrepreneurs. They all ran their own businesses. They all were like, "Oh, I'm here for a couple months, and then I go back to the U.S. or I go back to Canada." And that was when like the thing in my brain just went like, just kind of like, "What? You can do that? You can work from wherever you want. You can do
Mm-hmm.
whatever you want." I hadn't met anybody like that. Everyone else that I'd met in Toronto was 9 to 5. You get your 2, 3 weeks vacation. You go on a lavish vacation for 3 weeks, sure, but you got to be back at the office.
Mm-hmm.
You have to put on that tie and put on that jacket. And so I've come to meet people here that I'm way more aligned with. Again, that were born thousands of miles away from me,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel way more comfortable, way more at home here than I ever did in Toronto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think when you first made the jump, like 2020, 2021, early 22, it was less clear what was going to happen, both in Canada and here in El Salvador. And I think we've both turned out to be very right about our decision. And it's like every day passes, every six buzz headline you see ultimately reaffirms that you made the right choice, right?
Totally. So 2020, I came here March 3rd, 2021. That was like the date. I'll never forget it.
Nice. The anniversary's
Uh,
coming up, dude. Like
Yeah,
2 weeks.
yeah, exactly. So I'll never forget the day. And because for me, like you said, we're gonna be, I was right in my decision because at the time I was just gonna do what all these other people that I met did, which was spend 3 to 6 months in El Salvador and then go back. So my idea was I'm going to go to El Salvador right now because A, it's cold in Canada. March still kind of cold in Toronto.
Yeah.
B, the COVID stuff was happening, and I just had a feeling that they were going to lock down the airports and you weren't going to be able to go anywhere. And I was like, I'm not going to deal with
Hmm.
that. I'd rather get stuck in El Salvador than get stuck in Toronto.
Right.
So I'll deal with that nonsense when the time comes. And then as soon as I land in Toronto, I started hearing all the headlines like, yo, you can't travel unless like you're vaccinated, blah, blah, blah. I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna let it play out. Like I'm here, I'm chilling, everything's gonna be fine. I'll move back to Toronto when things get back to normal. Like let's talk, let's say July, August, things. I'll go back to for Caravana actually. I used to love the Caravana Parade. It was like my favorite Toronto event.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'll be back as long as I'm back in time for Caravana, everything will be fine. And I ended up not leaving. So I ended up staying here because I really enjoyed it. I actually had planned to go back to Toronto and I bought my flight and then I canceled it. Because the
Oh shit.
moment the moment I bought it, I felt like that was not the right decision.
Mm.
I bought it mostly to go back and touch base with my friends because they were like, "What are you doing?" To go back and touch base with my family because they were like, "When are you coming back?" Because at the time, no one believed that I was going to stay here. Everyone just thought I was going through a phase, which could be the case, but now it's a 4 year phase. So I bought my ticket, and then I think like a couple of days later, I just canceled it. I was like, "Nah, this doesn't feel right. I need to stay here, and I need to continue exploring what El Salvador is all about." And here we are, 4 years later, still here.
That's awesome, man. It's great to hear the story. And people have everyone has like a slightly different spin on the story, and that's why it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast to hear your spin on it as a someone who grew up in Canada, of Salvadoran origin, made the move back, and did something pretty cool with it, like opening a physical store and everything. And I'm sure this is just the beginning.
Yeah, actually, one thing I want to say before we go is like if you're the child of an immigrant, my family always told me Canada has the best education in the world. Why would I go anywhere else if the opportunities in Canada are great? But I see something similar, but I'm going to twist it in a different way. If you're the family of an immigrant, if you have immigrant, heritage and you come from anywhere else that's not Canada, which most people do, and you studied in Canada and you learned, you spent a good chunk of your life in Canada and you learned a few things, take that back to where you're from. Go spread that elsewhere. There are a lot of
Mm.
good things that I learned. There are a ton. Go figure out how that can work in other communities. Go find a way that you can, fuse and immerse yourself and use the things that you know along with the things that the local community from wherever you go and try to mix those things. Don't and this is a strong word, but don't go to like don't colonize because that's how some people can feel as well. That's how the local community can feel. No, try to really immerse yourself. Try and see what it is that you learned while you were in Canada, while you were in the US, wherever you're from, and see how you can apply that and how you can work along with the locals to create a better community for everybody. Because there are a lot of good things that you can take from those places, from your experiences, and try to implement them wherever you go. So that's one thing that I think I'd like for people to understand. Take those things that you've learned and and use them to create something better for wherever it is that you want to go, whatever it is that you want to build.
Love it. So where can people find you? Where can people learn more about what you got going on?
I'm going to shill the Bitcoin hardware store right now. So if you ever want to come down, learn about Bitcoin, learn about why El Salvador uses money, why it's the best form of money, come visit me down in El Salvador, in El Zonte, Playa Zonte. We are the Bitcoin hardware store. You can find us on Twitter at TBHS_SV. You can find us on Instagram, same handle, TBHS_SV. I just opened up a TikTok account. You're the first one to know.
Mm.
Same handle, TBHS_SV. We're on Noster as well. If your fan base doesn't know what Noster is, I highly recommend people look into that. It's a
Mm.
decentralized communications platform, And yeah, we also just starting up our YouTube page. So the Bitcoin hardware store, look for me there. If you ever have any questions about Bitcoin, you want to learn what it is, how to use it, how to keep it secure, hit me up. We'd be glad to help you out.
Definitely. And if I can add a note here, we can help anybody get residency in El Salvador. We can also help people of El Salvadoran descent get citizenship in El Salvador if you don't have it already. I actually had 2 people sign up for that service just in this past week alone to get citizenship by descent in El Salvador. So we can help with that, or residency for all the non-Salvadorans as well. It's quite easy to get residency in El Salvador in the sense that you don't need to invest or show too much finances. There's a lot of different paths to residency. So hit us up, book a call with My Latin Life, link in the description, and we can make that happen for you. This has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Again, our guest today, Ronny Avendano from the Bitcoin hardware store. Please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to this. Leave a review, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Ciao for now.